All right. Chapter 29. There have been published several observations upon a single-like regularity of the Barisal Guns, which, because unaccompanied by phenomena that could be considered seismic, may have been detonations in the sky, and which, because, according to some hearers, they seemed to come from the sky, may have come from some region stationary in the local sky of Barisal. In Nature, 61-127 appears a report by Henry S. Schur, who investigated the sounds in the years 1890 and 91. These guns are always heard in triplets, i.e., 3 guns are always heard, one after the other at regular intervals, and though several guns may be heard, the number is always 3 or multiples of 3. Then the interval between the 3 is always constant, i.e., the interval between the first and the second is the same as the interval between the second and the third, and this interval is usually 3 seconds, though I have heard it up to 10 seconds. The interval, however, between the triplets varies, and varies largely, from a few seconds up to hours and days. Sometimes only one series of triplets is heard in a day. At others, the triplets follow with great regularity, and I have counted as many as 45 of them, one after the other without pause. In volumes 16 and 17, Cel et Terre M. van den Berg published a series of papers upon the mysterious sounds that had been heard in Belgium. July 1892, heard near Brie by Dr. Rainmakers of Antwerp, detonations at regular intervals of about 12 seconds, repeated about 20 times. August 5th, 1892, near Dunkirk by Professor Gerard of Brussels, 4 reports like sounds of cannons. August 17th, 1893, between Ostend and Ramsgate by Professor Gerard, a series of distinct explosions, state of the sky giving no reason to think that they were meteorological manifestations. September 5th, 1893, at Middelkerk, loud sounds of remarkable intensity. September 8th, 1893, English Channel near Dover by Professor Gerard, an explosive sound. In Ciel et Terre, 16-485, M. van den Broek records an experience of his own. Upon June 25th, 1894, at Louvain, he had heard detonations like discharges of artillery. He tabulates the intervals in a series of sounds. If there were signaling from some unknown region over Belgium and not far from the surface of this earth, or from extra-mundane vessels, and if there were something of the code-like resembling the Morse alphabet, perhaps in this series of sounds, there can be small hope of interpreting such limited material. There may be suggestion to someone to record all sounds and their intervals and modulations, if, with greater duration, such phenomena should ever occur again. The intervals were 4 minutes and 23 minutes, then 3 minutes, 4, 3/4, 3 3/4, 3/4. September 16th, 1895, a triplet of detonations heard by M. de Schrever of Brussels. There were attempts to explain some of M. van den Broek's correspondents thought that there had been firing from forts on the coast of England, and somebody thought that the phenomenon should be attributed to gravitational effects of the moon. Upon September 13th, 1895, 4 shocks were felt and sounds heard at Southampton, a series of 3 and then another. But I have no other notes upon sounds that were heard in England at this time except the 2 explosions that were explained by the police of London. However, M. van den Broek says that Mr. Harmer of Aldeboro, Suffolk, had about the 1st of November heard booming sounds that had been attributed to cannonading at Harwich. Mr. Harmer had heard other sounds that had been attributed to cannonading somewhere else. He could not offer a definite opinion upon the first sounds, but had investigated the others, learning that the attribution was a mistake. It was M. de Schrijver's opinion that the triplet of detonations that he had heard was from vessels in the North Sea. But now, according to developments, the sounds of Belgium cannot very well be attributed to terrestrial cannonading in or near Belgium. In Ciel et Terre, 16-614 are quoted two artillery officers who had heard the sounds but could not so trace them. One of these officers had heard a series of detonations with intervals of about 2 minutes. A variety of explanations was attempted, but in conventional terms, and if these localized repeating sounds did come from the sky, there's nothing to it but a new variety of attempted explanations, and in the most unconventional terms. There are recorded definite impressions that the sounds were in the sky. Professor Pellissiner's positivement Aaron in Ciel et Terre 17-14. M. van den Broek announced that General Hanquin of Brussels had cooperated with him and had sent inquiries to army officers and other persons, receiving 30 replies. Some of these correspondents had heard detonations at regular intervals. It is said that the sounds were like cannonading, but not in one instance were the sounds traced to terrestrial gunfire. January 24th, 1896, a triplet of triplets. Between 2:30 and 3:30 p.m. by M. Overloop of Middelkerk, Belgium. 3 series of detonations, each of 3 sounds. The sounds went on, but after this occurrence, there seems to me to be little inducement to me to continue upon the subject. This indication that from somewhere there has been signaling from extramundane vessels to one another, or from some unknown region to this earth, as nearly final as we can hope to find. There are persons who will see nothing but susceptibility to mysticism of numbers in a feeling that there is significance in threes of threes. But if there be an attempt in some other world to attract attention upon this earth, it would have to be addressed to some kind of a state of mind that would feel significances. Let our 3 threes be as mystic as the 11 horns on Daniel's 4th animal. If throughout nature, like human nature, there be only superstition as to such serialization, that superstition, for want of something more nearly intelligent, would be a susceptibility to which to appeal, and from which response might be expected. I think that a sense of mystic significance in the number 3 may be universal, because upon this earth it is general, appearing in theologies, in the balanced compositions of all the arts, in logical demonstrations, and in the indefinite feelings that are supposed to be superstitious. The sounds went on as if there were experiments or attempts to communicate by means of other regularizations and repetitions. February 18th, 1896, a series of more than 20 detonations at intervals of 2 or 3 minutes, heard at Ostend by M. Pulsies, an engineer of Brussels. 4 or 5 sounds were heard at Ostend by someone else, repeated upon the 21st of February, heard by M. Overloop at Ostend, April 6th. Detonations at 11:57:30 a.m. and at 12:01:32 p.m. heard the next day by M. Overloop at Blankenborough at 2:35 and 2:51 p.m. The last occurrence recorded by M. van der Broek was upon the English Channel, May 23rd, 1896, detonations at 3:20 and 3:40 p.m. I have no more data as to this period myself, but I have notes upon similar sounds, by no means so widely reported and communicated upon, in France and Belgium about 15 years later. One notices that the old earthquake explanation as to these sounds has not appeared, but there were other phenomena in England in this period, and to a considerable degree they were conventionally explained. They were not of the type of the Belgian phenomena, and because manifestations were seen and felt, as well as heard, they were explained in terms of meteors and earthquakes. But in this double explanation we meet a divided opposition, and no longer are we held back by the uncompromising attempt by exclusionist science to attribute all disturbances of this Earth's surface to a subterranean origin. The admission by Simmons and Fordham that we have recorded as to the occurrence of 1877 and 1889 have survived. The earliest of the accounts that I have read of the quakes in the general region of Worcester and Hereford, London Triangle, that associated with appearances in the sky was published by two churchwardens in the year 1661 as to occurrences of October 1661 and is entitled A True and Perfect Relation of the Terrible Earthquake. It is said that monstrous flaming things were seen in the sky and that phenomena below were interesting. We are told truly and perfectly that Mrs. Margaret Petmore fell in labor and brought forth 3 male offspring, all of whom had teeth and spoke at birth. Inasmuch as it is not recorded what the infants said and whether in plain English or not, it is not so much an extraordinary birth such as in one way or another occurs from time to time that affronts our conventional notions, as it is the idea that there could be relation between the abnormal in obstetrics and the unusual in terrestrics. The conventional scientist has just this reluctance towards considering shock of this earth and phenomena in the sky at the same time. If he could accept with us that there often has been relation, the seeming discord would turn into a commonplace, but with us he would never again want to hear of extraordinary detonating meteors exploding only by coincidence over a part of this earth where an earthquake was occurring, or of concussions on this earth time after time in one small region from meteors that only by coincidence happen to explode in one local sky time after time. Give up the idea that this earth moves, however, and coincidences many times repeated do not have to be lugged in. Our subject now is the supposed earthquake centering around Worcester and Hereford, December 17th, 1896. But there may have been related events leading up to this climax signifying long duration of something in the sky that occasionally manifested relatively to this corner of the London Triangle. Mrs. Margaret Petmore was too sensational a person for our liking, at least in our colder and more nearly scientific moments, so we shall not date so far back as the time of her performance, but the so-called earthquakes of October 6th, 1863 and of October 30th, 1868 were in this region, and we had data for thinking that they were said to be earthquakes only because they could not be traced to terrestrial explosions. Hang on. Excuse me. At 5:45 p.m., November 2nd, 1893, a loud sound was heard at a place 10 miles northeast of Worcester, and no shock was felt. However, at Worcester and in various parts of the west of England and in Wales, a shock was felt. According to James G. Wood, writing in Simmons' Meteorological Magazine 29-8 at 9:30 p.m., January 25th, 1894, at Plathamas and Clifford, towns less than 20 miles west of Hereford, a brilliant light was seen in the sky. An explosion was heard and a quake was felt. Half an hour later, something else occurred. According to Denning, it was in several places near Hereford and Worcester supposed to be an earthquake, but at Stocksay Vicarage, Shropshire, was seen the same kind of an appearance of that which had been seen at Plathamas and Clifford half an hour before, an illumination so brilliant that for half a minute everything was almost visible as by daylight. In the English Mechanic 74-155, David Packer calls attention to a strange meteoric light that was seen in the sky at Worcester during the quake of December 17, 1896. I should say that this was the severest shock felt in the British Isles in the 19th century, with the exception of the shock of April 22, 1884, in the eastern point of the London Triangle. There was something in the sky. In Nature 55-179, J. Lloyd Bosworth writes that at Worcester, a great light was seen in the sky at the time of the shock, and that in another town a great blaze had been seen in the sky. In Simmons' Met Mag 31-180, are recorded many observations upon lights that were seen in the sky. In an appendix in his book, The Hereford Earthquake of 1896, Dr. Charles Davison says that at the time of the quake, 5:30 a.m., there was a luminous object in the sky and that it traversed a large part of the disturbed area. He says that it was a meteor, and an extraordinary meteor that lighted up the ground so that one could have picked up a pin. With the data so far considered, almost anyone would think that of course an object had exploded in the sky, shaking the earth underneath. Dr. Davidson does not say this. He says that the meteor only happened to appear over a part of this earth where an earthquake was occurring by a strange coincidence. Suppose that, with ordinary common sense, he had not lugged in his strange coincidence and had written that, of course, the shock was concussion from an explosion in the sky. Shocks that had been felt before midnight, December 17th, and at 1:30 or 1:45, 2, 3, 3:30, 4, 5, and 5:20. And then others at 5:40 or 5:45 and at 6:15 o'clock. And were they too concussions, but fainter and from remoter explosions in the sky? And why not? And if, of course, the great shock of 5:30 o'clock was from a great explosion in the sky. And by what multiplication of strangeness of coincidence could detonating meteors or explosions of any other kind so localized in the one little sky of Worcester, if this earth be a moving earth? And how could their origin be otherwise than a fixed region nearby? In some minds, it may be questionable that the earth could be so affected as it was at 5:30 a.m., December 17, 1896, by an explosion in the sky. Upon February 10, 1896, a tremendous explosion occurred in the sky of Madrid. Throughout the city, windows were smashed. A wall in the building occupied by the American legation was thrown down. People of Madrid rushed through the streets, and there was a panic in which many were injured. 5 hours and a half, a luminous cloud of debris hung over Madrid, and stones fell from the sky. Suppose, just at present, we disregard all the Worcester-Hereford phenomena except those of December 17, 1896. Draw a diagram illustrating a stream of meteors pursuing this earth, now supposed to be rotating and revolving for more than 400,000 miles in its orbit, and curving around gracefully and unerringly after the rotating earth, so as to explode precisely in this one little local sky and nowhere else. But we can't think very reasonably even of a flock of birds flying after and so precisely pecking one spot on an apple thrown in the air by somebody. Another diagram, stationary earth, bombardment of any kind one chooses to think of, same point hit every time thinkable. The phenomena associate with an opposition of Mars. December 10th, 1896, opposition of Mars. But we have gone on rather elaborately with perhaps an insufficiency to base upon. We cannot say directly that all the phenomena of the night of December 16th, 17th, 1896 were shocks from explosions in the sky. Only during the greatest of the concussions was something seen, or was something near enough to be seen. We apply the idea of the diagrams to another series of occurrences in this period. Now draw a diagram relatively to the sky of Florida and see just what the explanation of coincidence demands or exacts. But then consider the diagram as one of an earth that does not move and of something that is fixed over a point upon its surface. Things can be thought of as coming down from somewhere else to one special sky of this earth as logically as precariously placed objects on one special window sill sometimes come down to a special neighbor. In the monthly Weather Review 23-57 is a report by the Director of the Florida Weather Service upon mysterious sounds and luminous effects in the sky of Florida. According to investigation, these phenomena did occur in the sky of Florida about noon, February 7th, 1895, again at 5 o'clock in the morning of the 8th, and again between 6 and 10 o'clock, night of the 8th. The editor of the review thinks that 3 meteors may have exploded in succession in the sky of Florida and nowhere else by coincidence.